If you've spent any time digging through wartime field manuals, soldier diaries, or after-action reports, you already know there's a huge gap between what armies taught officially and what men actually did to survive. And that gap is exactly where the most fascinating, most brutally effective, and eventually most forbidden tricks lived. For the next few minutes, stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't the sugar-coated museum version of World War II survival. These are the methods soldiers swore by, the ones commanders used quietly, the ones historians whisper about because they reveal how war really worked on the ground. And before we dive in, subscribe to the Prepper Historian so you never miss the long-forgotten tactics that still teach us something today. Now, let's get into the 9 banned survival tricks that were so effective, militaries eventually outlawed them. The first banned method was the use of improvised chemical smoke to disorient patrols long enough to escape. Soldiers learned that certain mixtures of rubber, oil residue, and cloth scraps produced thick, choking clouds that forced enemy scouts to halt or remove masks. It didn't kill, but it created a 10-second window to reposition or break contact entirely. Commanders banned it because accidental inhalation often disabled their own men and could cause diplomatic headaches if it drifted into civilian zones. For survivalists today, the takeaway isn't to replicate it, but to understand environmental manipulation. If you can momentarily block vision, create discomfort, or force a threat to reposition, you gain the initiative. In practice, that could mean using harmless smoke pellets, dust, light, or noise to give yourself a brief, crucial advantage in an escape scenario. Another trick involved forbidden camouflage alterations that blurred the line between soldier and civilian. In dense European towns, some units dyed their fatigues with charcoal and clay to resemble local workwear. Others cut their jackets into civilian shapes to evade snipers trained to spot military silhouettes. Allied commands eventually banned these modifications because it violated the rules of war and increased the risk of soldiers being treated as spies. The practical lesson here is shape disruption. Modern preppers can apply the same principle ethically by avoiding predictable silhouettes. Neutral-coloured outerwear, layered clothing, and breaking up outlines during movement can, drastically reduce visibility in wooded or urban terrain without mimicking civilians in conflict zones. A particularly controversial technique was the use of silent, improvised trench alarms made from scavenged metal and tensioned wire. These devices allowed single sentries to monitor long stretches of front line without calling for extra manpower. Once artillery barrages intensified and shifting lines made them hard to track, they were banned for causing false alarms and unnecessary counterfire. But the principle remains sound. Early detection is survival. Today you can build legal, harmless perimeter alerts with fishing line, bells, or battery-powered trip sensors. The key idea is low-tech awareness, something every historian prepper can honestly appreciate. One of the most effective but, honestly, banned water ration tricks involved underground seep collection using helmet filters. Soldiers would dig these shallow pits near marsh edges, place cloth-lined helmets inside, and then just let moisture condense overnight. This clever method helped avoid contaminated standing water, but, it often violated hygiene regulations and disturbed protected zones. It was forbidden because, when done improperly, it could spread disease. Yet, in truth, it saved countless men during forced marches. Modern survivalists, you know, can use a safer version by digging seep holes a few feet away from a water source, letting sediment settle, and then disinfecting properly. The tactic isn't banned anymore. Just remember to use proper purification. Another outlawed practice was, actually, the use of bait fires to mislead artillery spotters. Soldiers would set small fires away from their actual encampment to trick enemy observers into calling shells on the wrong coordinates. It was incredibly effective, but because it could ignite forests, civilian farms, and even friendly positions during wind shifts, it was banned. The lesson is decoy deployment. You can apply this in training or preparedness by using harmless decoys, reflective materials, heat sources or noise, to mislead threats or wildlife without causing damage. One of the more brutal strategies was the pairing tactic, where two scouts alternated exposure during reconnaissance. One man would briefly reveal himself at a distance to draw fire, while the second silently identified the shooter's location. High Command banned it because casualty rates skyrocketed and it was considered unnecessarily reckless. Still, the underlying principle, drawing attention in one direction while observing from another, remains relevant. In practical survival training, you can recreate this with objects rather than people. Use a bright bag or jacket as a visual bait and observe from concealed angles. A lesser-known banned trick was the field fermentation of emergency stimulants. Soldiers, you know, would actually create these crude, glucose-rich brews from bread, fruit scraps and water just to maintain alertness during those long night watches. While not harmful in small amounts, it quickly became a bit of a health nightmare, causing dehydration and stomach issues. So commanders ended up banning the practice and enforced standardized rations. For us today, the lesson is really about energy management. It's best to carry high-calorie, long-lasting food options instead of, well, improvising. Efficiency and clarity of mind are worth more than any risky stimulant, you see. Another survival technique involved weapon insulation using animal fat and cloth strips. This method kept rifles functional in freezing conditions by preventing moisture from freezing on moving parts. Eventually, though, this was outlawed because it caused malfunctions, attracted pests, and made weapons much harder to clean. However, the principle, protecting critical gear from moisture, is absolutely relevant. Use modern lubricants, desiccants, and proper storage tools. The historical version was crude, but the concept remains timeless. The final banned trick was nighttime movement guided by horizon breaks instead of compasses. Soldiers learned that certain ridge lines, tree silhouettes, or distant structures stayed visible even in moonless conditions. They relied on these markers to bypass enemy positions or retreat silently. High Command eventually forbade it because too many units wandered off course. But navigation by natural landmarks still matters. In practice, this means training yourself to identify consistent features during daylight and using them as backup directional cues if electronics fail. These 9 survival tricks reveal something essential about World War II soldiers adapted faster than doctrine. They bent rules, improvised tools, and used whatever the environment offered, even when command later banned it for safety, legality, or political reasons. And for us, whether we're historians, preppers, or both, every one of these stories carries a practical lesson. Study the principle, not the outlawed method. Extract the wisdom. Avoid the danger. If you learned something new today and want more hard-hitting historical survival breakdowns, subscribe to The Prepper Historian and share this guide with someone who appreciates the real side of history.